Hello, and welcome to the Parent Cafe podcast.
Woo.
We're excited to have you back, or if you're a first time listener, to have you on board with us. I'm Sarah,
My
and
name is Allie.
and today we have some unschooling friends here with us. We have Marsha Shack and Stephanie Sewell. So I'm going to hand it over to you girls and tell us what you do and how you came onto this journey. So, welcome to our show.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Sarah and Allie. Thank you for having us. I know I'm delighted to be here today, and thanks for the great introduction. So, like Allie or Sarah said, my name's Marsha Shack, and I am a educator and a facilitator and a permaculture designer, and I work for an educational nonprofit called Classroom Connections, and I grew up in Edson, so that's exciting. And I've been
Hometown
and
girl.
hometown girl. That's right. That. And then after I grew up there, I took off for the city and got my BEd at the University of Alberta in 2007. And then I spent roughly about a decade teaching and traveling in the conventional K-12 system. I joke that I pretty much taught everything from kindergarten to grade 12, except for PE and math. They'd never let me do those two, which was fine by me. And when I wasn't teaching or traveling, I was actually volunteering on some small scale organic farms using permaculture principles and like ecological design. And it was really interesting because it took me like throughout Australia, New Zealand, Ethiopia, all these crazy places. And as I was learning about farming and living off the land and learning about these principles that we glean from nature to create these really like abundant, lush, delightful, resilient gardens that are really nurturing not only for people, but also for the wild world, I started thinking about my students and I was like, well, hang on a second. Humans are living systems and we're part of living systems. So what kind of lessons can we glean from nature to help us grow into the most abundant, lush, resilient humans that we can be? And that's when I really started to understand the difference between teaching and learning and really starting to dig around and like, okay, so hang on a second, I'm a teacher, but what am I actually supposed to be doing here? Which is like fostering learning and a love of learning. And that's when I discovered, some of the main principles of unschooling, which are humans are biologically designed to learn. Like we come out of the womb curious and we want to figure things out. And so how was I supposed to do that within my classroom? And noticing these things about how we are naturally designed to learn helped me shift my teaching practice from that of a teacher to a role of like a facilitator of learning. And then it shifted me straight out of the door of the conventional system because I realized that there actually is not enough space within the structures that we have to actually truly foster deep, passion-driven learning that we are all like born with. We come out ready to learn. So that's how I kind of ended up in the space that I am today.
Wow. Very interesting. I feel like we could just talk about
I
like your
know.
whole journey for the whole hour,
Yeah, we'll have to like part 2, 3 just about you guys.
right? Part 4, unschooling. We'll get there eventually, guys.
I could talk about this. Well, I will talk about this for the rest of my life. So that works for me.
Amazing.
It's actually really neat for me to hear that because I met Marsha through this unschooling work, and I thought I kind of understood where she came from and why she was in it, but I just have a whole new understanding now. So that's awesome. Thanks, Marsha. So I'm Stephanie Sewell. I'm not from Edson. I'm actually from England originally, and I live now in Chelsea, Quebec, which is really close to Ottawa. And I currently work as an independent education consultant, and I also am part of this international think tank, which is looking at ways of transforming the education systems throughout the world to better meet the needs of people in this 21st century that we're in. My background is as a teacher. I taught mostly elementary. I then homeschooled my own kids, and I was a facilitator of homeschooling cooperatives, of other homeschooling families' journeys through that experience. I also run a kids choir, and that's kind of my I realize it's the way a lot of my thoughts about education play out, and it's my way of bringing the music that was my initial university thing. I did a Bachelor of Music degree in piano performance.
Cool.
That's how I live that now, and I love doing that with the choir kids. So how did I get thinking about education differently? Well, when I was little, I used to play with my dolls and line them up and teach them. So I'd always had this sense that I want to be a teacher. And that translated into my going to do a Bachelor of Education degree after a whole bunch of teenage and early adulthood volunteering as a teacher and teaching English in Poland and things like that. So,
Oh,
I'm from Poland.
so that I went to that kind of conventional place of a Bachelor of Education degree. And then I quickly realized that so much of what we were being taught to do in the context of teachers wasn't resonating with me, which brought me to teach in an alternative school, sort of a small alternative private school, which still had a pretty traditional kind of curriculum. I wound up leaving there because I wasn't feeling good anymore about requiring kids to spend hours every evening doing homework, and it just wasn't feeling right. So I just stopped and decided I needed to figure out next steps, which, as it happens, was becoming pregnant with my first child. And we always assumed that he would just go to school. And in those early months, I realized he wasn't on a daycare track like so many of my friends' kids were. I wanted to be with him. Our second child came along, and we were just living life. And as we started getting close to that school age, I really thought, why would I take this 5-year-old and send him to school full time? It didn't make sense. Like some core part of me, that just didn't make sense. And I guess because I met homeschoolers by that point, I was kind of familiar with what homeschooling was. I knew that there was an alternative. And so we were able to make the decision to follow an alternative path. And my eldest homeschooled all the way until grade 12. And then he decided to do a year of school prior to, he's now in a gap year. He's 19, he's doing a gap year and then heading off to university. My youngest was home until grade 4. And then she had another brief stint as a homeschooler in grade 8. And she's chosen to be in school other than that. So one of the phrases that's remained with me that I think is maybe a turning point for me was when Oliver, my eldest, was about 4. I was speaking with a mom who's a homeschooler, and she said to me, it just never made sense to me to send my kids to the system to be raised. And at that time I was like, come on, like you're just sending them to school, geez, like relax.
Yeah, I know.
Then the more I kind of started exploring it and feeling into it and then living it as a homeschooler year by year, I understood more what she meant. And so now in my work as an independent education consultant, I'm working with people to help them realize that they own their learning. So Oliver chose to go to school for grade 12. So you could look at him and say, well, he's just a grade 12 like everybody else, but he chose it. So we own our learning. And I want people to see that there are many ways for that education journey to play out, to empower parents and kids and teens to realize that there are many, many choices and they can take them.
So as like homeschooling, you're facilitating their learning as the parent at home, right? Or did you have someone else?
So in our case, I was kind of the homeschool parent. So we'll get into the difference between homeschool and unschool, but just to kind of respond to the initial intent of that question. So lots of people will have their kids at home and the formal learning happens with the parent and only the parent, but often there's co-ops. There's like one person who'll come in to teach something. You know, my son had a history group that we just created because there was somebody we knew who like couldn't stop talking about history. He was so passionate about it. So I was like, hey, could you come and teach, agree with this group of homeschoolers what they would like to learn and work with them. And that was an amazing learning experience for him for a couple of years. So that kind of thing happens a lot, days of homeschoolers coming together and different parents or somebody hired.
Yes.
So for people not to think like if you choose the homeschooling route, it doesn't necessarily mean that you now become teacher.
Absolutely. Yeah. That is super important. And
that's not for everyone either.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think nowadays with like all this virtual learning, that's what people think is what homeschooling is just like you're the teacher now, even though like you don't know how to be a teacher, right?
Well, and I think that comes back to what Marsha was saying. And Marsha, I was over to you for the idea of learning versus teaching.
I liked that.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Well, this was a big learning for me as a teacher. It's like, what is the difference between teaching and learning? So in my mind, it's kind of hard. It's like, because I want to say we don't have to be teachers. Kids are actually already want to learn. So if you're thinking about unschooling, it goes by lots of names like learner-led, passion-driven, self-directed is another way to do it. And in that role as an adult, because there's still an adult child or relationship or an adult young person relationship there, you become a facilitator of learning. And like the main difference of that is that you're not directing the learning. You're not saying, okay, kids, today we're all going to sit down and we're going to learn our times tables, because that's a teacher approach, right? Because in your head, you're like, my child must know their times tables in order to make it in the world.
No.
Where, which is true. I mean, don't get me wrong.
I mean,
you need our times tables.
How many times do you need your times tables though?
Oh, I don't know about you, but I calculate stuff in the grocery store about
what. Oh yeah,
that's true.
That's
true.
Yeah, up to a certain number.
For sure.
Yeah, exactly. Phones. They'll never be in our pockets.
All right.
Anyways, sorry.
Wrong.
That's my entire argument with times tables. Okay, I picked a bad.
No, I liked it. I taught
I'm going to support your times table argument. Yes. But keep talking.
I like the times tables. I taught my brother and I are 7 years apart. I sat him down and taught him times tables when he was like 4. So you're good.
Yeah.
I like the times tables.
That's a good example. So you sat him down and taught him rather than him coming to you and saying, you know what I really, really, really want to learn is how to
multiply.
Build a robot.
Yeah.
To scale.
I think too, like that's obviously the mindset's changed, right? Because when I was teaching him the times tables, it was being drilled into me at school. So then I was like, let's play school. I'm going to drill times tables into you. And then I'm going to bribe you with snacks because that's what powered him. But now he's in actuarial sciences and loves math. So, I mean, I take full credit.
So you should. Because you said a really important thing there, Allie. You said the word play.
Yeah, we were playing.
How kids learn is through play. So you were playing with your brother.
Yeah.
Right? And through that experience, he learned.
Yeah, it was play for me and like torture for him, I think, for a little bit. But because I was really forcing play.
But at the same time, to go into that example again, he was probably consenting to be with you. He could have done it. No, and that's something that we talk often about consent when it comes to things like drugs and sex.
Right.
And I think if we start thinking about consent when it comes to education, then right away we go, wow, like how does that invite us to think about things differently? And that's, again, going back to Oliver in grade 12, like I didn't tell him you have to go to school. He chose to go to school. So when he's sitting in that classroom and he's got a wonderful teacher or a crappy teacher, he knows that he's chosen to be there. He's consented to the experience that school is. So that's a key thing, I think.
I love that.
Yeah, me too.
I think that really kind of speaks to like certain subjects that maybe you weren't good at as a kid, and then it was kind of being forced on you to learn about it, and you just like hated that time of day. You're like hiding in the bathroom or like, you know what I mean? I had that, like, I remember that experience, and then it's just traditional school. So
you have to
go.
do it.
Exactly. Like you're in trouble. And that was just the way. And
or you won't move ahead.
Yeah. And I know you mentioned the like sending your kids to school, Stephanie, to the system to be, what did you say? To be.
It was what this friend had said to me. She didn't want to send her kids to the system because they would then be raised by the system. That's actually something a friend of mine said about her own mom, that like their perspective was that school was meant to raise your child
And then when your kid gets home from school, they've had their like lessons for the day, where like instead it should be if your child comes home from school, you're now giving them the life lesson. That's not what school does. Right? Like, so I loved that when you said it, I was like, boof, I just talked to someone about this.
Well, and it's, what Marsha and I, as we mentioned, we were chatting a little bit earlier, and so we were talking about the definitions of unschooling and how different people like to define it. And when I talk about it as living without school. And the reason that I do that is because for me, it was that sense of, well, my kids were born and we started living with them. And at every moment, you're instinctively making choices and deciding to do things or not do things based on their needs and your dynamic as a family and your needs as a family. Mm-hmm. So unschooling to me is you just carry on doing that. So just because they turn 4 or 5 or 6 doesn't mean they should have to go to school. Like I remember when Oliver was that age, I just remember wishing that the system wasn't such that all of a sudden all of his friends were going to be whisked away by yellow buses for the better parts, like the best hours of the day, that he was suddenly going to lose the chance to play with many of the kids he played with. I mean, we created new communities and he played with them after school and all of that, but it's just that sense that there's this kind of artificial thing that happens at that age. And if it doesn't happen, we as parents can still follow our intuition, our sense of what our kids need, and continue to raise our kids well. We will be able to help them learn to read. We will be able to help them do the math they need to do. And just like, if you have a 3-year-old who's not talking, you may go and seek out the services of a speech therapist to help figure out what's going on. If you have a 12-year-old who's not reading, you might go and seek out the services of a reading specialist to help figure out what's going on. All of these things that we're used to having responsibility for and ownership over, but when our kids are toddlers, we can continue doing the same kind of growth through their lives.
And I think that you're touching on a really good point there too. When you think about traditional school and you say like the 12-year-old that can't read, there are kids that are in traditional classrooms that are falling behind because they're not getting one-on-one attention. And they may not be at the reading level they need to be, but there's no one there noticing necessarily, getting them the help that they need. So they're struggling through those grade levels, like barely making it. And so, and then you don't really get those services unless you're noticing. But if you're working with your child in the kind of, one-on-one day-to-day learning, and then you notice a struggle and you're like, okay, I can intervene here. Let's approach this differently. Where in the school system, it's like, this is the approach.
And I think too, it like just role models that like they can, when they're older, they can go out and seek help for themselves if they're having an issue, right? But like in the school system, it's like go to a teacher, go to a different teacher. But with this, like it's like, okay, well, there's all these services that are out there that you're now able to do it yourself because you
lost Marsha.
Yep.
Oh, there she is.
Lost you for a sec.
I was like, she didn't like what I was saying.
I blame the blizzard. It's a blizzard outside.
Oh no. Anyways,
the services.
And the services that these children can now go and find themselves because you've shown them by role modeling to go out and seek their own help.
And also to move through life seeking out the things that you're interested in learning as well. So it's interesting, talking about the idea of reading. There's some very interesting research being done right now looking at dyslexia and whether the way that kids are introduced to reading in a school context is actually causing some of the dyslexia.
I've heard that too, actually.
Yeah. Because, in the homeschooling, particularly the unschooling types of community, you will have kids who are 9 and 10 who aren't reading, like who really aren't reading. And then suddenly they decide they want to read Percy Jackson. And before you know it, they're reading Percy Jackson, like within a couple of weeks. This happened.
Mhm.
And so again, is that examples like that allow us to think about reading
Mhm.
as a skill acquisition in the same way that walking is a skill acquisition.
Mhm.
Because, try to get a kid to learn to walk when they don't want to,
Yeah.
Mhm.
like ridiculous, right?
Right.
Try
Or
to
just not
teach a
ready.
kid to walk,
Yeah.
like,
It's just a fight and a stressor for
yeah,
parents.
help
Mhm.
them when they show that they're ready to. Off you go.
Give
Well,
them the tools that they
Mhm.
need.
And kids
Hold
are
your hand,
usually
be ready to catch them.
yeah.
Like,
Kids are usually excelling if they're enjoying what they're doing. So you're
Yeah.
right. If you're 9 and you have no interest in learning to read or reading in general, and then you want to read Percy Jackson, and it's like, well, no, I want to now, so I'm going to learn how to read because I need to read this book.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, I always kind of look at that as like playing an instrument. Like if you have a kid that's like super into playing an instrument, they're going to learn how to play that instrument and play it well because they're interested. I was never interested. So it was my mom forcing me on Saturday
Mm.
afternoon to go play guitar. And it's like, I don't want to. Like, I have no
Yeah.
interest in this. And now I don't play guitar, and I'm glad I don't, because I did, like, I never wanted to. I don't know. I like see it's kind of the same. Like there's certain skills though. I feel like parents now have this hard time like removing them from, oh no, this is something that you learn in school. You turn 5, you start reading, you learn math, you learn this.
You have to
You
know all these
have to.
things before you get into school too.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, go ahead.
no, go ahead, Marsha.
Well, and I was going to say, and yeah, that, and yes, that the parents do, and we do believe we have to know these things before we get into school, because that is true. Because
It's a
once
requirement.
they get into the system,
Yeah.
and you just said, bringing it back to what you said about not having that one-on-one support, because of the structure that we have developed our conventional school system around, if that kid can't read by 5, yeah, they're going to have a really hard time progressing through the rest of the stages along the way, and they're not going to be able to fulfill their potential because they're not fitting into the box that the system has said is the box that they need to fit in at this particular moment. So parents aren't wrong for thinking that or saying that. It's just that the system that we're trying to fit our children into is not fluid and flexible enough in order to really adapt to their needs and to their interests.
Yeah, fitting into that box, like they've just made it so unattainable now, I feel too. It is just hard. It just keeps like leveling up almost. Like I remember when I was a kid, I don't remember like my mom sitting me down and like being like, we have to learn our ABCs now, but like we played, right? It's like that's how my mom would teach me too, is like through play. So but once you get into school, it's almost like, hey, now it's like, sit here, let's do our worksheet. And like they just make it so hard, and then now it's like harder for parents too.
Yeah, they suck the life out of learning.
Yeah.
Learning is supposed to be fun.
Yeah.
And kids learn through play. And this is one of the reasons why, like in a lot of the self-directed circles, they'll talk about the importance of mixed age play. You know, a 5-year-old, I mean, I'm pretty cool. I know a lot of stuff. But a 5-year-old doesn't want to learn from a person over the age of 35. Who would they rather learn from? That
like an
7-year-old, that
yeah.
8-year-old, right? Who would they rather nurture or share with? That 3-year-old, that 4-year-old, right? So the ability to get our kids together, which is funny in the situation that we're in now with COVID, where we're like, you can't be together, but you know what? We actually need our kids to be together, and they need lots of kids with lots of different ages to play with, because they learn best from each other. And our job then is, as parents and facilitators and the school system in general, is to create that container around those kids so that they can run around in there and play and mess up and fall down and do whatever they need to do that's really messy. And we help keep that containment for them here when they're younger. And then as they get older, we have to slowly move those boundaries out so that they have more space to play.
Until they turn 19 and decide they're going to go to university and move out.
But Stephanie, you said something that has really resonated with me in the last couple of weeks, which was all about the choice that you made to develop the relationship that you have with your kids. Do you want to maybe speak a bit to that?
Yeah, so I guess it's something that I've sort of realized as a parent, and the more I work with other families, helping them on this journey of parenting and schooling or educating, the relationship is the most important thing. And, and that's something that we can kind of obviously agree to it. But I guess what's becoming abundantly clear for me now, as we're in this stage of, Oliver is going to leave home soon, because that's the natural way things go, and he's ready and all of that. Once he leaves, the only way that we continue to have a relationship and an ability to be part of his life is if he chooses to continue to interact with us. And that's the relationship. So having that clarity really helps me in day-to-day things with him and with my daughter, who's 16 now. Because sometimes it's like, no, like you really do have to put away your stuff. Jeez. But then it's like, okay, but yeah, they really do have to. They know they have to, but they're still not doing it. What's most important right now? Is it that they put that thing away, or is it that I say what I need to say and remember that the relationship is the most important thing? So it's amazing how often that helps to diffuse a situation, no matter how old the child is. And it doesn't mean that you're letting them walk all over you or not do their responsibilities or any of that, but it just means that it's easy for us to get caught up on doing your chore, doing like the kind of external things are the most important. But if we can always come back to the relationship, then it comes back to, well, what's actually going on here?
Right.
And how do we keep that relationship whole so that we can always be there for them and engage with them and be the parent that they need in that moment?
Do you think a lot of parents, like their relationship, because like they're putting that pressure of having to go to school, you have to go to school, you have to do that exam, you have to do that, does that hurt their relationship a lot? Like, do you see this often?
Absolutely. And it's not because it's not like a maliciousness or anything from anyone. It's that system, right? Like most of us grew up going to school.
Yeah.
And we think that our kids should go to school. It's the best way to get an education. We didn't love it all, but we still have to do it. Like, it's all that kind of stuff that we're thinking, that we're the places that we're acting from. And that's why my tagline is own your learning, own your life. Because if we can always remember that whether you're at school, you're homeschooling, you're unschooling, whatever, you own your learning. So then it becomes, okay, well, if you've got a test tomorrow and I see that you're scrolling through TikTok instead of preparing for it, as a parent, I can say, oh, I remember that you have that. How are you feeling about it or whatever? But I don't have to come in at, you have to. So, and that's okay. Like, we can realize then that our child will go and maybe they won't do well on the test and they'll experience whatever that consequence is. And better that they experience that while we're here to provide that container that Marsha's talking about, while they're still at home, than that they experience that for the first time when they go off to university. And likewise for a much younger child, that, okay, you've got to get ready, hurry up. We can take some of the pressure out of those situations by recognizing that, own your learning. Well, do you need a day off today? Own your learning. Would it be helpful if I took you to school today instead of getting on the bus?
Yeah. I think I experienced that as a kid. My mom went through school as a child psychologist. So I think I kind of lucked out because she understood us in a different way. And I got lucky, but not everyone has that. But I mean, I attended school traditionally, but there were days where my mom would look at me and be like, you look tired. You're not going to school today. Today, we're going to do this instead. My memories are not of school. The things that like I hold like as like my best memories or things that I've learned are unrelated to school entirely. Like, I don't even feel like I went to school. You know what I mean? Like, I graduated all 12 years of school. I went to university. I went to another university. And I still am like, I don't know if I needed that necessarily. Like, I learned so many things outside of school. So I think like it's nice if parents understand that if you send your kid to traditional school and they're there 9 to 3, that's the majority of their day, But if you can't be there as like a support system and you're just there as like the extra drill sergeant that they've already got at school from 9 to 3, they're not going to have a positive experience, and they're probably not retaining information because they're stressed about it. But if they come home and you're there, like you say, to be that support and have that relationship, then at 30, they're probably going to be calling you and talking to you on the phone every day because you're their friend now. You've supported them through like the hardest part of their life in their eyes up to that point. Like, so I agree. I think that that's completely like the most important part. And like, I guess the job of a parent is like to be support for your child. And that's why they're on earth. Like,
And you're also, by doing that, you're letting them see that school is a part of their life.
Right.
And that school is not the be all end all. That you can, if they come home with a bunch of homework, and like one of the things I help parents to do is figure out, like, if you've got a child who's 8 years old who's getting stressed out by homework, well, how can you manage that? And it can be simply a question of writing to the school and saying thanks, but we'll be spending our evenings doing family things. We need not to have this homework as part of it right now for our child's well-being. And offering to work with them to facilitate whatever's going on in the class. If they're taking up homework, like, how's that going to work since your child didn't do it or whatever, but understanding that you do have agency, and that everybody who's involved with schools, I think maybe 99.9% of people got there in the first place because they love kids. And the more complex the system becomes, the easier it is to lose sight of what truly is best for kids. So as parents, if we can bring, this is what's best for my child, how do we make this work?
Advocating for them.
Yeah.
It's funny we should get onto that, because I don't know if this is, I guess this isn't being put out live, but so tomorrow from today, and there is a conversation, Marsha and I are both involved in a group called Unschooling School, which hosts conversations every Tuesday at noon my time, 10 o'clock Mountain Time. And we're actually going to be talking more about how to support and advocate for your child within the school system. So that'll be available as a recording, and I'll make sure that you get the link to that.
Yes, please.
Awesome.
Yeah, and that's just, we all love these kids. How do we all make it work best for them? And we as parents have different insights and perspectives than the school does.
How, as like a working parent, do you do this? Because like I think like as a working parent, you would want to just send them to school because like that's what's easy, right? So like how like would you unschool or even homeschool? Well, we'll just focus on unschooling. How would you do that as a working, if both parents work as well, or if you're a single parent?
Yep. And that's where people get really creative. So first of all, it's, to me, the first step is to accept that a really valuable role that school plays is that of caregiver for children who need care. And that's okay. So that idea of, it's okay to send your child to school because you need them to be cared for. And what flexibility might you create in there? So if you're wanting to be an unschooling family, but you need to be absent from the home for a few hours a day, perhaps your child can go to school part-time, depending on where you live. Perhaps you can hire a caregiver part-time. Maybe there's a teenage unschooler locally who would come and care for your child. Maybe there's another family that would take your children in the morning while you take theirs in the afternoon. Maybe you have grandparents around. What a gift, like that. My kids spent a day a week with their grandparents as that when they were younger. What a gift for everybody. So again, it's going back to that, when they were 2 years old, if you needed to be able to go and do groceries without your child, what did you do? And then it's an expansion of that thinking that can help you find solutions.
I like that you said attending regular school as a safe place for them to be for like caregiving. Like I kind of see it that way. Like I see school as like, okay, as a working parent, you're going to send your child to school, but the most valuable lessons are learned at home. So yeah, they could be learning some history, some math, things at school. There are things that stress them out. Maybe as a parent, that's where you go advocate for them, like we'd mentioned. But then school doesn't have to be this like stressful be all end all. This is where you go, you're learning certain things, you're social, you're making friends, you're meeting other people. You have this teacher you really like, or maybe you don't like them. But then when they get home, the time spent with you is the time where they're learning the life that they want to live. So is that kind of like, am I understanding the point of this? Like, do you know what I mean? Like, because I honestly, I still, when I think of like unschooling, I'm thinking quite literally like, okay, my kid's been in school for till grade 6 and now I'm unschooling. So I'm taking away the school that they've learned thus far. Like, do you know what I'm saying? I
How do
think a
they
lot of
get like the
people,
education piece, like to move forward to like university for say,
right.
like
I think
if
a
you
lot
are
of people
taking
have
school?
that same
Yeah.
question. Yeah.
Marsha, do you want to start?
Yeah, and then I'll pass
Marsha.
it to you. So it's a really, yeah, because this is something I get geeky about words, right? So we're
Yeah.
talking about two things here. We're talking about school, which,
Mhm.
which is a physical location with people that you actually show up to every
Yes.
day. And then you're talking about something else, which is education, which is a completely different concept. What is it, and what does it mean to be an educated system, an educated person within this world that we live in today? And we all know that there is no way that us as adults can even predict what kind of world our children are going to grow up and live in. So there's like two pieces. There's like, what is school and what is education, and being able to separate those two things from one another when you're having these conversations and thinking about these things as a parent. That's what I want to say. Stephanie.
Yes, sorry, I was scribbling so I would remember what I wanted to say. I want to go back to what Ali said about school and like unschooling happening outside of school and school being fine. So my note says, if underlined, it's a good experience. And I think that's what we're seeing more and more, is that the more, for so many reasons, a lot of kids are really suffering in school. And I don't use that word lightly. I mean, a lot of kids just like it or don't like it or whatever, but there are kids who are truly suffering. And these are often the kids that I'm helping. They're like, there's a thing now, it's called school refusal. Like when I first heard that term, I was like, really? Like, can we just say that they don't want to go? But school refusal is it's a diagnosis. And that speaks to how serious it is. Like there are kids who just can't go. They just, it causes so much anxiety, depression, panic attacks, all kinds of things. And that's because of the way those children interact with the structure that is their school. So that's one kind of scenario. And then there's also the scenarios where it seems like everything is going really well with school. And I'm starting to get more parents come to me with this. It's interesting because they'll say like they go every day and they seem happy enough and they're getting good marks, but there's no light in their eyes. They don't care about anything. There's nothing that they're passionate about. It just feels like I've lost my kid. And that to me is equally troubling. And if you think about that kid who keeps on going through high school, through university, maybe they go and get a job and they just keep going on autopilot. And at what point do they wake up and realize, who the heck am I and what do I want to do and how do I figure that out? Because I haven't had the opportunity to live like that since I was 6 months old. Like, so that's why I'm so passionate about the idea of bringing awareness to what is happening for our kids, whether they're at school or at home, like just to learn to see them, to look for that light, to, if somebody doesn't want to go to school, well, what does that mean? Is school harming them? Is their experience of school harming them? So then going to what Marsha was saying about school versus education, yes, they absolutely can be separated. And we get into all kinds of really neat conversations in this world of like alternative educators about, well, what is education? How do you define education? And everybody just seems to define it differently. But to me, it has something to do with it's what we as a society feel that our children need in order to be able to live well in society as they are grown up. So living well is their own well-being, mental and physical, and to be able to contribute to the wellness of the society as well. So if we think about that, like if we think about adults that are able to be well, and we work backwards,
Mhm.
then first of all, the whole structure of like, we send them all to these buildings and sit under fluorescent lights and be told what to do for all these hours, it just doesn't make a lot of sense anymore, because they're not heading out to jobs and factories. They're heading out to this world of entrepreneurs and climate crisis and goodness knows what.
Mhm.
So first of all, there's just a disconnect between how we're having our kids spend their time and what we can easily see they're going to need as a bare minimum when they grow up. I can't remember where I was going with all of that, but oh yeah, so then the idea of education.
Mhm.
So if we think of that idea of education being what they'll need to live well in this world, they can become educated outside of school. Potentially they can become educated at school. They can definitely become educated outside of school, because outside of school, you and your child are creating what they need. So to answer Sarah, you were talking about university. If they want to go to university because they've identified a need to do that, like my son wants to be a mechanical engineer because he wants to work in the bike industry and designing bike parts and all of that. So he's kind of working back going, okay, everybody I know who does that has a mechanical engineering degree. In order to get a mechanical engineering degree, I need to know all this math, physics, chemistry. How am I going to learn it all? So he did like grade 10, 11 years. He was just learning a lot of it. He had a mentor. He just was soaking it all up. And then he was like, you know what? I'm going to go to school for a year. I'm going to get marks in those classes, which is a way of me showing that I've got that knowledge.
Right.
I'm going to make sure I've learned everything that everybody else will have learned. And then off I go into university. So he's kind of working backwards.
He's coming from a place of passion versus kids just going through it because it's what
And
they're supposed to be doing.
And then deciding what they want to do whenever through their life.
Yeah. And so so to answer your question, it is entirely possible to do that,
Okay.
to be an unschooler, to identify university as something you want and to figure out the way to get there.
And then university might not be their intent or goal ever.
Exactly.
Well,
I just think now a lot of like jobs, they look for those things. So I just think like, and a lot of parents are probably like, well, if they don't set themselves up for that possibility, then maybe that they can't get those jobs in the future. But like you were just saying, that they can work their way, like, okay, this is what I want to do, then they'll figure it out how to get there.
And you can go to university at age 21-ish. It's different in each province, but you can go without any conversation about high school because you're going as a mature student.
Yep. I was looking into that too.
Yeah.
Because there are certain things now that I like to go back for. And it's like, I don't even need to apply with my high school diploma. So I apply with like a letter and this is me, and you know what I mean? So I actually, when you were talking about that, it kind of makes me feel and think about the shift that there's been in the last like 10, 20 years too, with when we were all kids and when our parents were kids, what do you want to be when you grow up? It was like, I want to be a doctor. I want to be a teacher. I want to be a veterinarian. And then they're like, okay, my child wants these things to be. So they're going to go through traditional school. They're going to go to university. They're going to become a lawyer. They're going to practice law for 10 years, wake up one day and go, why am I doing this? I hate it. And then they decide, actually, no, I'm going to be a YouTuber. But and now when you see and you ask children, what do you want to be when you grow up? A lot of them are like, I want to be a blogger. I want to be an environmental, like their answers are so different. Their answers don't require formal 9 to 3, sit at your desk education. And it's entrepreneurial more so now than ever. And the traditional jobs that we used to like, I want to be this. I don't even know that I had one. I think I wanted to be an astronaut, but that happened. I think it's much different. Like now we kind of have this ability to, like if your child says, I want to be this, it's like, great. Well, when you get there, you can decide that. And then you can go to school and become that. Like there's no rush to follow this system. There's nothing saying they have to.
Yeah. And there's so many alternate ways into the job world now, and into the world of careers.
Yes.
Like Google has its own substitute
Exactly.
for university program thing going on now, and all kinds of different ways that you can move through life. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Could you just imagine a world where we like unchained, especially adolescents from school, and gave them the freedom to experiment and discover and innovate and learn and just like be with one another? Like I think about the like 13, 14, 15, 16-year olds that I know that are just totally cool and full of energy, and they can see the kind of future that they want to move towards. So I love that idea of like planning backwards that you said, Stephanie.
Yeah.
Right? It's like we actually do that as teachers. That's what we're taught to do when we're planning units, is like we plan in reverse. We're like, where do we want our students to go? How do we plan the steps backwards? And what I'm seeing with the adolescents that I get to hang out with is like they can see the future that they want to move towards. So like, let's get out of the way and let them move towards that direction, and think about the kind of world we'd be able to create and the problems that we'd be able to solve if we were able to give our children that sort of freedom and that choice and that container to experiment and play in.
And the
You
control.
gave me goosebumps.
And we can look to examples like Summerhill School in England and the Sudbury Valley School model, which are kind of unschooling in a community context, like community of a school context. And we see exactly what Marsha's talking about. Like the kids that I work with in my teen program who are unschoolers now, self-directed learners, they're amazing. Like the things they're doing in this world and the ideas they have, like that you gave me goosebumps as well, Marsha. Like imagining that everybody would be in that situation.
I think it also falls culturally too. Like us in our like Western world, it's like 16-year-olds have no place in certain things. Like we've made that happen where now it's like, okay, to get this job, you need this many years experience, you need this education, where you could have an adolescent that could probably do that job really well, learn along the way, and have new and better ideas and bring something else to the table, but we don't allow them that freedom and control. So, and that's a societal problem, like here, because I know that worldwide, there are countries that involve their youth and their adolescents. Cape Town, like there's a university in Cape Town that brings adolescents and youth in for research studies because they want their involvement and like their opinions because they're different than adult thinking.
They value them.
Yeah, it's completely different, and it's a huge societal problem, I think, too. But that's getting really deep.
Marsha and I share a video with you that one of our colleagues created about there's 6 or 7 youth talking about sociocracy.
Yeah,
just kind of like democracy.
Yes. Yeah.
We'll have to share the video with you.
Yeah, share it with us.
An example of what like 14 to 17-year-olds having that kind of conversation. Like they're way better at it than adults are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They have a lot of great ideas, but no one's
and a lot
listening.
to say.
Yeah.
And people only care about the things that they are involved in creating. So it's natural that, you know, young adults don't actually care about school because they weren't involved in creating it. They're only interested in things that they're interested in and interested in creating. And that's why, just going back to what you were saying, Allie, about like the cultural shift, that's why it's like, one of the things I'm so excited about is to see happening in Edson is that cultural shift. So we're seeing a nature school popping up.
Yes.
We're seeing talking of a Montessori kindergarten coming into the public system. You know, we're seeing those shifts, and all of those shifts, those tiny things, those individual choices we make on a daily basis are going to help us shift in that direction. So, like my mom teaches kindergarten in Hamilton, Ontario, and they're very like, put a smart board in your classroom, everyone gets an iPad. And she's like, no, we're going to go outside and play in the mud for an hour. And I don't care if you get upset that your child's dirty on their way home because they probably learned a lot more.
And they can get clean.
My mom is like most loved and most hated.
Loved by the kids, hated by the adults.
In Hamilton, they have a great charter of children's rights and responsibilities. I'm sure she can refer to that to justify anything.
She does.
Yeah, I think it's so awesome that it like this just gives parents a new perspective that like there's not just one option, because I think like for our whole lives there's just this one option that we really is mainstream known about. So I think this, like having you guys here, really opens up another door for parents. So thank you for for coming on and talking to us. We
My
do. We
pleasure.
have to wrap up,
Yeah.
but I think we would love to have you guys back because I think we could talk for hours.
I want to talk about institution. I want to talk about I just want to talk about all of it. So
I don't even think like we like dug in at all. Like I feel like we're just like we just started.
Well, there's the Tuesday noon my time conversation that I mentioned is a great way, like for anybody who's listening to this and for you guys, these are the deep conversations that we get into. It's a different topic every
I'll
week.
definitely have to
So
link it.
exciting to have
Yeah.
get to have those conversations.
That's awesome.
Thank you guys so much for sharing this with us.
Yes.
And welcome back to Edson virtually.
Yeah.
Thank you
You're welcome.
for having
And
us.
yes, and thank you for joining us all the way from Quebec, was it?
Chelsea, Quebec.
Yes. Thank you.
Look at
You're
us.
very welcome. It was a pleasure.
Nationwide this morning, guys. Thank you so much again, and we'll connect soon and have you on one more time, maybe 2 more times. 'Cause I honestly,
We'll see where it goes.
yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys. Nice to meet you.
Bye.
Bye.